Hello, sorry about that. It's a bit of a technical glitch. I may have to send a link out. Hopefully, those of you that were waiting can hop back on. Okay. Okay. So let's get started. It's always a glitch, right? Um, Thank you for being here today. I just wanted to, take an opportunity to talk about four areas that I think are foundational in really creating a life and a love that we desire in all aspects, right? Whether it be love and relationships, whether it be just up leveling anything that feels near and dear to our hearts. And so I'm running an upcoming group this fall, and I go deep into these four foundational components. And so, if you feel inspired after this live to like go deeper and learn more, I would love for you to join us. But today, I really just want to take a dive into these areas so we understand how all of these aspects and components come together. Because I'm going to start with self love, and self love being something that we really hear tossed about everywhere, right? Like, love yourself, and oh, I practice self care, or I practiced these things, but they've become so watered down that we don't always know what it even means to practice this in real time. And so let's start with this area. And I'm hoping to tie this specifically into love and relationships. But when I talk, like, really consider all the ways this can expand out even deeper to anything you're working on in life right now. Okay. So, you know, if we really look at where we stand energetically, many of us are taught that we're not worthy, right? That we're not good enough, that is somewhere outside of ourselves. It's something that we're on a quest to find, to get, right? And we're not remembering that the self love and self worth is inside of us. It's already part of us, asking us to really reclaim it, in a way. But there's so much messaging, and we're inundated with so much, how do I say it? So many advertisements, so many messaging that it's somewhere else. Like, once you buy this, or once you look like this, or once you have this, then you're good enough. Then you're going to be worthy. Then you're going to love yourself. We have the answer type of thing. And a lot of this is something that just leaves us on a perpetual hamster wheel, kind of chasing our tail and constantly looking, only to find that once we have the one thing, then we need another, then we need another and another and another. And it's just endless. And so once we start to recognize this, it's only then that we can really begin to embody self love and really reclaim this and invite this practice in daily into our lives. So, a lot of us, and using love as an example, we will say we want this deep, intimate partnership. But when we say that, we're not actually giving ourselves the very thing that we're saying that we want from another person. We're almost energetically conveying, like, I don't love myself, but I hope you do, or I don't accept myself or think I'm good enough, but I hope you will. And this will never lead to the outcomes and the abundance in which we long to experience, because we are looking outside of ourselves for something that we haven't even given ourselves permission to own internally, right? And so, in order for things to really manifest externally, there has to be that deeper inner work. Hello, hi. There has to be that deeper inner focus and showing up to ourselves in this way. So, if we're energetically conveying to a man, don't reject me, but you're rejecting yourself, trust that those energetics are going to lead. And so, so much of beginning to practice self-love is really recognizing, where are you approaching love from? What's your baseline? Is it from this negative bias, or is it from just this really deep belief that all the things that you desire are possible for you? Are you asking outside of yourself for what you've not been able to give yourself, right? So I would love to hear, make this as interactive for those of you that hop on as you'd like. I would love to hear your questions regarding it, or areas you get stuck, and we can, sort of play with it that way. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue to share and see what that may inspire you to, kind of think about or to express here as we talk. Um, a lot of this has to do with, of course, the stories that we tell ourselves, right? Those protective mechanisms that kick in, where we are not calling ourselves out for things that we're essentially making up about ourselves or about others, right? These stories of, I'm not good enough, or I'm at a deficit, or they have something that I don't. All of these ways in which we put ourselves in the victim, unworthy sort of space. And beginning to recognize those stories and see them for what they are, which is essentially something that we've made up as either a coping strategy or as a way to internalize something difficult we went through when we were young and didn't have critical thinking. But these are all areas in which we want to really start to call ourselves out immediately, where we see that we're reacting to ourselves and the things in which we're telling ourselves, and to hold space to redirect that, right? But we're not just allowing ourselves to go down these perpetual rabbit holes and getting stuck in all these sort of hypotheses and different ways in which something could go. But we're really practicing that present moment awareness of dealing with what is, right? Because when we're in the present moment, we always have the ability to deal with what is. But if we're going down sort of story and rabbit holes, we are resisting what is, and we are not facing, the present moment, which is always where we want to begin and reset and start fresh again and again, right? Let's see. Also, as women, especially, I'm not sure, how many of you on this are women, but the bulk of my audience is obviously coaching women. We have this very deep conditioning that to prioritize ourselves and to take ownership of what's right for ourselves is selfish, and that we need to continuously make ourselves the sacrificial lamb in order to prove that we're there for others, or that we're a good person, or that we're doing the right thing. We are operating under this baseline belief that this is something that has to be proven, instead of really owning that in order to be your best quality for others, you've got to be able to take care of yourself, right? And I don't mean this in this really exaggerated way where you're ignoring your obligations or the things that, you're accountable to, right? We can take this too far, but we're holding that space to self honor and to really show up to the things that are for our highest good and that allow us to operate in this world from that high quality space. But if we are constantly saying yes when we mean no, or if we're constantly hemming and hawing because, oh my gosh, what are they going to think of me? And we're in their world and concerned about their perception and disregarding our own, we're going to be highly confused and we're not going to feel good. And the more we actually say yes when we mean no, when we need to actually hold that space of self love and self honoring, the more that resentment builds within. And so we want to avoid rationalizing and saying, oh, it's okay, I'll just do it, no big deal, right? We want to really hold that space. And it may seem like some really benign thing in the moment, but you'll be able to recognize the more as you practice this, is this going to have a residual effect on me? Is this going to be unclean? Is this going to have a heaviness? And if you say yes to that, really making a decision that takes some courage, but is in alignment with what's for your best, right? Can you relate to this? Let's see. Also, like, what does the practice of self-love look like, right? Sometimes we'll hear different things and sort of these mainstream culture around practicing self-love, like go get your hair done, or go get a manicure, or go get a massage. Like, while those things are valid, self-love is often just something so much more simple than that. It's really in that very moment. We're not postponing it in 2 weeks when we've got that appointment to look forward to, but it's like that showing up right now. Like, right now, what do I need to do for myself right now in this moment that would be loving, that would be self-honoring, that would really enhance these skills that I'm working to build, and to cultivate inside of myself. And self-love is really the basics. While those things are valid that I gave as examples in mainstream culture around like self-care, self-love is often, having the glass of water, choosing the healthier food option, choosing to get a solid night's sleep versus, being productive and doing more, 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 more. It's really that self-accountability to have a balanced life. So you know how to access what is best for you. And you're going to see as I continue talking how this builds into the other areas of boundaries, of intuition, of feminine energy. So when I do this group, the reason I start with like self-love and confidence is because this then branches out into the other areas that are really critical for women. I'm going to try to spend 15 minutes on each topic. So I'm moving into boundaries now, but feel free to, share anything that comes up as I go. Okay, let's see. Boundaries. Okay, this is also a very hard one for women because, as I've mentioned, we're kind of encouraged to take care of everybody else's emotions. And so I've shared this in a lot of my different lives and videos that boundaries is not as natural for women. In fact, if we look generationally, there's been, we've relied upon men for a sense of survival. And so that is something that lives within us. And so that can be something that is very scary, because I know in this day and age, that's not the way we live, but it is something that we store. And so this idea of, saying, no, I can't do that, or no, that doesn't work for me, we're facing a lot more than just that given scenario. There's a lot of depth to it that can feel really scary in the moment, right? So when setting boundaries, it really is less is more, right? We tend to want to soften the blow of why we need to say no or to justify it. And less is more, where we're really practicing building off of the self-love component, where we're taking responsibility for our emotions rather than trying to control another's perception of us. Because as soon as we're trying to control another's perception of us, we are going to get our message muddled in all of the details of over explaining, of making sure that they feel comfortable emotionally, of making sure they understand our point of view. And then it's like, okay, where are we, what are we trying to convey here? So when you're setting a boundary, it really is holding that steady space within yourself, right? Maybe you've got a lot of emotions going on, maybe your heart's beating. So you're really paying attention to kind of what your body's doing, and you're just bringing it down, right? Bringing it down. You're breathing, you're showing up in this way, and you're just speaking in one or two sentences your truth. And if it's disregarded, maybe you have to set a slightly stronger boundary, right? But you don't need everybody to understand you or agree with you, right? you're just speaking your truth, and you're letting, if it's in the case of a man, you're kind of just letting him be a grown man and work through those emotions around your boundary, right? You're not stepping in to fix it or soften it or help him process it. You're just trusting that he's going to have the capacity to move through something that's reasonable, right? So this is very, very hard when we are used to being problem solvers and trying to make sure that we've got everything wrapped up in a nice bow and everybody's happy and feeling good about something. But instead, it's like really surrendering that and allowing it just to be what it is, where you're self-honoring and you're facing the fears around doing that. Once this becomes something you recognize, you're no longer going to be able to easily justify going into people pleasing and sort of pacifying another's ego. You're going to have to like show up in a real way, recognizing this is deeply nuanced. And of course, there's going to be times in which you have to compromise and work together. But if it's like a hard boundary, like I don't feel safe, like legitimately don't feel safe type of thing, or you know that it is like so not okay for you on any level that you are not getting through the moment at the expense of yourself, right? Let me know how that lands for you. What else did I want to say about boundaries? Oh, yes. The reason I start with like self love in the group and self confidence is because if we don't have boundaries, we don't have confidence, right? Those two things go hand in hand. If we are confident in who we are, boundary setting just becomes natural and deeply integrated. It just becomes something that we do and that we hold space for. But it takes practice. So in the beginning, if you're new to this, or if you're like a recovering people pleaser, you're going to be wobbly. It's going to feel wobbly and challenging, and that's okay. The more you practice this, the more it will naturally integrate and become a part of who you are. And the other interesting thing as it relates to men, if we don't have boundaries, he is not going to feel safe around us because, like I just said in talking about the self love piece, it's our energy that leads. And so I'll notice that a lot in my life, right? If I say something different than the truth, the people in my life can feel the energy, right? The energy is what they feel. The words and the energy they don't match. And so when we're saying, oh, I'm fine, but we're not fine, or when we're saying it's okay, but it's not okay, what we are doing is we're creating this space relationally where he doesn't feel safe around us because we're not telling the truth. And so, in order for a man to really feel safe around us, we've got to be willing to hold that line for ourselves and be comfortable owning what is. And this is actually something that can really, really deepen intimacy. As I've shared in a lot of my different videos, emotional safety is one of the most critical pieces to having a deep, loving, intimate relationship. So, all of these things that I'm talking about now require that emotional safety to be at the forefront. Being safe within yourself, though, right? Not, that goes back to that self abandonment thing. How can we feel safe within ourselves by being truthful and honest and owning who we are? So then others just kind of acquiesce, right? So it is. Let's see what else. And I did talk about this other piece that I wrote down, really attempting to control how others see you and letting go of that, right? Letting go of that. How can we stay with our own experience versus giving so much attention to what do they think of us? What does he think of me right now? It's more, how do I view myself right now? What do I think of him? If it's like the early stages of dating, right? What do I think of them, rather than trying to decipher and figure out how to put yourself in this more sort of desirable or likable version, and instead really just focus on you and what's authentic and true to you. This is a true practice. Okay. Any thoughts on that? Anyone have any challenges with boundaries or anything they want to share? Type in the chat if you do. Otherwise, I think that's kind of all I'm going to speak to on boundaries. But in the group, we do a lot of scripting, we do a lot of different scenarios and ways in which we regulate our nervous system so we can really show up authentically to this. And that leads me to inner child intuition, which is something I also devoted a module to in the group. Because if we're not self honoring, if we're not setting boundaries, if we're not really showing up for ourselves, our intuition becomes deeply buried. We don't know what we think. We don't trust ourselves to decide anything for ourselves. We instead end up doing things like taking a poll or getting outside opinion on everything, writing endless pros and cons list, doing endless research on something. And before you know it, we are so good and confused. So accessing intuition is really tapping into these elements that I've been talking about, these foundational components of accepting ourselves, tuning in to decide what is right and what is for our highest good, and then being able to convey that to any person, right? Not putting others before ourselves. This allows our intuition to come through and for us to really show up even when it's hard. The thing with intuition that I've shared a lot here before, but I think is really worth mentioning, is that it's never going to be highly convenient, right? What your intuition is asking of you is typically, not always, but typically going to be the harder thing. Our intuition is the part of us that, gives us the idea to move across the country or to, quit our jobs or to start fresh. It's going to be something that is hardly convenient with like the linear path, right? And so that's why it's so hard, because as soon as the mind kicks in, it's going to try to like rationalize all the reasons we shouldn't go that way. The ego is going to get involved and say, oh, no way, like too much. We can't do that. That's crazy. And we're going to try to like stuff it back down into something more certain or controllable, right? And so the way intuition goes with the inner child is the inner child is the emotional body. It's the emotional part of us that is more reactive and unconscious. So the inner child is the emotional part of us that has these needs, that has that will and doesn't understand how to get their needs met or how to process fears in a healthy, loving way. And so the inner child work is essentially an opportunity to like reparent ourselves in the way that we never received growing up, whether we grew up in a healthy family or an extremely dysfunctional family. It's being able to build self-trust where our consciousness, our higher self leads, rather than just being at a whim to our emotions or the things going on around us. And so the deep aspect of inner child healing is allowing the internal to direct the external rather than being pulled at a whim to all the external factors and letting that dictate our mood or how we feel. An example of how this would look in relationship is like, let's say you're in a partnership and you're in a good mood and they come home and they definitely aren't. How do you hold that space for yourself? Do you just unconsciously get pulled into their drama and now you're in a bad mood, even though you didn't start off that way? Or can you actually consciously hold that space and say, okay, I don't have to make this about me. I don't have to get yanked into that. I can actually stand tall and remain in a good mood. You're still going to have like that sort of shakiness maybe, but you're choosing to like show up for yourself versus falling into kind of codependent tendencies, right? This is really, really critical, because when we go with whatever emotion our partner has or the other person has, that's also a form of self abandoning, because we're letting the inner child get just yanked we're letting the inner child lead, and now we're in a bad mood too. We were fine, but now we're in a bad mood and we don't even know what our partner was upset about or if it actually even has anything to do with us, right? And so a lot of it is really recognizing this kind of this codependency, and this is everything that was modeled for most of us, right? So no judgment, because we've all had to like go through this, I believe, at some level. It's going to vary person to person, but we've all had this kind of codependency really prevalent in the relationships that were modeled for us growing up. And so can we hold that space and not let the inner child just kind of take over so we can make solid decisions? Because imagine in a situation like this, if consciousness is leading, very different. We give our partner the space to process. We don't make it all about us. Now we're operating from an entirely different sort of framework, right? And if you're with a masculine energy man, they want that trust to know that we can let them problem solve something without, kind of helicoptering or micromanaging in this way. Can we trust them and give them the space to work through something without getting pulled into it? Can we hold that space for ourselves and love ourselves through some of that uncertainty that we're feeling, or some of those rocky emotions, without just going unconscious and going into the trigger? These are all aspects of inner child healing that are really important to dive into, and to go to that original source of pain where we're scared and we don't want to face that, but to really show up for ourselves so we can see and trust that we've got this. And it becomes this really beautiful and empowering path. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Share if you do. Let me see what else I wanted to say on that. Let's see. So let's say we do fall into the succumbing of the other person's emotion. This would be a way in which we're self-violating in that moment, right? So as soon as we catch it, this is when we want to begin to redirect it. And it doesn't mean that like these difficult emotions or challenges won't be there, but we're showing up for ourselves differently. We're not going down the same neural pathway and saying, let's just feed this more, let's just keep doing this. We're seeing that there's a different path, that we can actually let this go a different direction, and we're building off of that, right? So it's not about perfectionism where it's like, oh, I really messed that up, now I'm like knee deep in it and I'm just going to stay. But it's like, as soon as you see that awareness that you could choose differently, you begin that practice, even if it's like after you've done several regrettable things, really building that flexibility internally to not make it worse or to drill it into the ground just because you've already made a few mistakes. That requires a lot of flexibility and catching ourselves and holding ourselves accountable in the moment. Let's see. And this also requires self-discipline, which can be really hard. What choice are we making for ourselves in the moment when we don't feel like it, but we know is for our highest good? Let's say we have this desire to take better care of our bodies, and so we're going to get up early and stretch or take a fitness class or go outside and run. But then in the moment, we're like, oh, I'm tired. That doesn't feel so good. Where is the self-discipline to know how to balance these different parts of you, right? The self-accountability where you can see the forest through the trees and see that's really going to be good for me, and I'm going to feel really good if I show up for myself that way. Or like recognizing, do I need to give myself grace today and kind of take the day off? Or when you're just doing what's easiest in the moment, that then leads to regret, because of course this then diminishes self-confidence and self-trust. So all these different areas go together, right? Really being able to see how one feeds the other, and holding yourself accountable. This doesn't mean you have to be perfect, right? But it just means that self-discipline is in place for you. Okay, let's see. And Feminine energy being a big one, embodying your feminine energy. It's only through confidence and self love, having boundaries, and deep access to our intuition that we're then going to feel safe to embody our feminine energy. If we don't have these other foundational aspects of ourselves in place, embodying our feminine energy is going to be really hard because we are going to be in survival mode and all of our instincts are going to be activated to do something like our life is at risk or like we are in the jungle fighting for something, right? Like there is a bear chasing us type of feeling. And so we're not just going to be able to be like, oh, like soften into your feminine energy. It's not going to feel safe if we haven't added these other sort of components and really started showing up to them. So this is why it can be so hard. And when we begin to embody our feminine energy, we have to be able to feel a lot. And so there is that nervous system regulation where it's like, oh, wow, it reveals the truth, right? Which is why we often want to do something because we're looking to be comfortable. We're looking to not have to feel that difficult emotion, or we're looking to not have to face what is. Again, it's like a way in which we can really deeply resist the moment. So feminine energy is going to reveal the truth, and we have to have the ability to balance and hold space for that within our bodies, right? Which is why, this is really hard for many. You're no longer trying to make or force something to happen because you have the self-awareness and the ability to see that that is not going to leave you feeling good in the end, that that is going to actually feel terrible in many different ways, right? So we can strong arm our way to get what we want, but it's going to fall flat. Or we can trust and face our fears. And then when we do it from this higher, more abundant frequency, it has a totally different effect. And it leads to more and more joy, more and more release, more and more faith, right? Let's see. Survival mode, as I've talked about before, it's not meant to be a permanent state, right? Survival mode is not meant to be this permanent state in which we live in. It's meant to be turned on and off for situations that require it. Like I said before, like a bear is legitimately chasing you. It's meant for those situations, but it's not meant to be this permanent way of living, which leads to tremendous burnout and exhaustion and a dimming of our most authentic self. And so I've had many of you share with me over the years, because survival mode can be like a real trigger for people too, in the sense that, you know, I am a single mom. I don't have enough resources right now. And I'm not going to attract the guy I want unless I'm like in this perfect feminine space. And that's not it, of course, but it's that recognition that this work is not an all or nothing situation, right? That just no matter what your circumstances are, you can tap into this. You have a choice, and you can really choose to grow this abundant side of you, this soft, more true and authentic aspect of you, or you can feed the fearful, you know, as my husband likes to say, like a game of whack-a-mole, right? Where as soon as you knock one out, you've got to like knock another one out. That can be an endless cycle we get trapped in. And so really look at those aspects of yourself that view this work as like an all or nothing, or that deflect and say, easy for that person to say, right? They're not dealing with what I have. Or just notice those tendencies where we can have a lot of resistance, right? And the ego kicks in to rationalize or justify why our thinking is a certain way. And so that could look like just little moments throughout the day where you remind yourself to check in, what's my body doing right now? What's going on within me? Where can I even just take a deep breath? Where am I breathing through my chest or running around in this ungrounded headless chicken way, but really showing up, even if it's just a moment in the evening, checking in with yourself. Are you still in this high stress mode? Are you still like in this really fast paced, solution oriented state? Or can you begin to like soften now? Can you start to tap into your body, into this ability to be present for what is and to put that stuff aside? Can you really embrace the non doing and really soften into what that experience is without having to be in that go mode? This can be a very unfamiliar place, I've learned over the years, for many, many women. And it requires that intentionality of slowing down and cultivating this brick by brick by brick. It's not going to be like one day, oh, now I'm in my feminine energy. Now I embody my feminine energy. It's going to be this ongoing, steady practice of releasing and allowing and tapping into your emotions and like really building this emotional intelligence with your words and within your body, this recognition to hold space for yourself. So I invite you to kind of play with this no matter what your circumstances are. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Those are the four foundational components that I really wanted to talk about briefly with you all today and kind of bring to the table. So if you have any questions, type them in the chat. Otherwise, if this inspires you, I'll post this live. You can listen to it again. Join us this fall. It's going to be my last group for 2023, and the fall is always a really beautiful time to run groups because I find that people are in learning mode, and it's just a lot of fun and playfulness within the learning as well. So thank you for those of you that were here today, and much love. I'll see you next week with a video. Okay, talk soon.